Welcome back to Ithaca BJJ. This is part 2 of our cross-collar choke series, where we use a bit of trickery to bait our opponents into some surprising submissions. Let's get started. This is where we start playing a bit of Jiu-Jitsu chess. When you get a deep and tight grip on the collar, experienced opponents will immediately try to break it because they know how dangerous it is to let you maintain that type of control. Notice here how John is leaning back. So this is where the fight happens. We're fighting for grips, and then you finally get that nice deep grip that you want, and then your opponent goes to break, and as they're going for that break, this is what usually happens. They lean way back. This reaction opens him up for attack. The key is to make your grip so deep and tight that it forces your opponent to react. Breaking your grip is much harder while hunched over, so they'll need to posture up. And when they do, they lift you with them, and you simply push up while coming forward. Notice how deep that grip is. Professor Matt is almost behind the neck. When you hold that nice deep grip, as I said before, it's difficult to break that grip while you're hunched forward. So your opponent leans back, and as he does, you come up. You're going to post with that backhand like Professor Matt is doing here. John goes to break. The hips come up, and as he goes to break and leans back, Professor Matt goes with his motion. Gets a nice firm grip with that backhand, and this forces John to base with his own hand. Professor Matt brings that hip up nice and high. Now, while they're likely thinking you're going for a hip bump sweep, we have something else in mind. And here it is, a sneaky triangle. Another option is a collar drag, which can lead to omoplatas or back takes. Watch how the rotation of the hips sets up the collar drag. And there's an omoplata. Now, if instead their arm ends up in front, you have a nice back take right there. Here's another angle with John working this on Professor Matt. As Professor Matt explains here, when you feel your opponent pushing on your grip and starting to posture up, push up while elevating your hips, just like you're going for a hip bump sweep. That forces that back arm to the mat and gives you more access to that triangle because your leg ends up in front of their arm. Here's another angle. Notice here how John stiff arms Professor Matt as he comes up, forcing Matt's hand to the mat. Then John's going to rotate his hips for the collar drag. And he continues pushing him backward before he hits that nice collar drag. And right there. Now here's Brian drilling this position with John. Right there. He pushes John back so far, it forces John's hand way back. Look what this does for Brian's leg. It puts his leg in front of that arm, making the triangle more accessible. And there's the collar drag that leads to the omoplata. Now, for those of you who are not new to this channel, you might notice that Brian normally wears a purple belt, but here he's got on a white belt. Well, he forgot his belt that day, and we don't exactly have a bunch of purple belts laying around the gym, so he had to be a phenom white belt for the day. So here's John drilling the same thing, and he's explaining to Brian the importance of pushing way back to get that arm out of the way to go for that triangle. Again, look how high John's hips are, which opens up that omoplata. Now we're going to go to a loop choke setup here. The setup for the loop choke is similar, but instead of going for the collar drag, you transition into almost a technical stand-up position. Watch this. So he's still posting that hand, but instead of coming up high on the hips like he did before, he jumps back. Now the next thing to do is to grab your opponent's head and pull him in under the armpit. The other hand loops inside, as Professor Matt demonstrates here. Now often, as that choke starts setting in, your opponent will grab your hands to give themselves some room. That's when you pull guard on them to tighten the choke. Here it is from another angle. Now this part is important. There's the base out, jumps back. Now watch this. Notice how low his hand goes on that collar. To get this loop choke, you need your hand lower on the lapel, not high. Then he pulls the opponent into the armpit, and then he rotates that choking arm up around the neck. Brian goes to fight the hands. Professor Matt pulls guard to tighten the choke. Now what Professor Matt is describing here is if the opponent's head is in the middle, you can't get the choke. If it's in the middle of your chest, you need to push their head over to your side, bring them in, and then loop the other hand in. It's almost like setting up a loose guillotine. Once their head is in position and they grab your wrist, pull them into guard, which makes the choke incredibly tight. And there you have it, folks. A bit of jiu-jitsu trickery to bait your opponent into some tricky submissions. Thanks again for watching, and remember to like and subscribe.